Good evening. This is the Wednesday, November 10th Community Preservation Committee meeting, and we have a quorum with Tom, Phil, Diane, Karen, Patty, and Teresa present. So thanks very much for coming out. I, without objection, would like to adjust our agenda tonight and start with item 5A, which is discussion of capital improvements matrix. As a quick backdrop, we talked briefly last month about how we felt that getting a better understanding of how the capital improvements matrix is made and how something, if someone were to approach us for community preservation funding, that I think there was some interest in knowing if it's a town request, should such a request be of a capital nature? Should it be on the matrix? And if so, how does it all work? So I want to thank John Norton, longtime chair of the Capital Improvements Committee, for coming out tonight. And John, would you mind just explaining to us briefly what's involved with the creation of this matrix, and how do items get on the matrix?
Well, pardon my voice.
How does it start?
What?
How does it start? Start from the beginning.
It starts from anybody wanting something, and it's put on a capital improvement, and it's funded if the department wants to fund it. It's funded against other competitive programs, and the best usually succeed. And you can put all yours on one of the capital agendas, or you can put it on one of the town's busy ones. It gets attention, but most people know which ones get attention and get dealt with that way.
Thanks, John. If something is not on the matrix, does that matter? Do you think that makes a difference if someone then is seeking funding? Is it a normal question that people would ask at town meeting or
it is.
FinCom?
It is, and it usually is on the matrix, but it doesn't have to be. There are sometimes building codes which are put in the building code because they'll prepay taxes and things like that for people. For the most part, if it affects the taxes of everyone in town, it's going to draw a lot of attention.
It's going to draw attention. Thank you. Patty?
No, I was under the impression that if it's not on the matrix and you need to go for, the town needs to go for a loan, it isn't approved because it's not on the matrix. They had this a couple of years ago, and they had to have a quick meeting, get it on the matrix, so that the town could go and get funding for, let's say it was a fire engine or whatever, they forgot to put it on there, and whoops, we need funding for that, well, we gotta put it on quickly.
Hello, Lisa.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much for coming tonight.
My
Appreciate it.
apologies, time completely got away from me.
No, not at all.
I feel like I just left here.
I can imagine.
You did.
We just made a quick adjustment to our agenda. We're just starting with this topic. And I'd open up to members of the committee if you'd like to ask questions, but I think the main thrust of the conversation last time we met included the question of if someone were to approach us for funding and they perhaps were part of a department, and should this committee be consulting whether or not the item is on the matrix? And if it turns out it's not on the matrix, there's probably nothing in the legislation that says we can't consider it, but would it be a best practice for us to then say to the applicant, if it's not on the capital improvement matrix for the town, it probably means that there are other important groups in town that don't know of its importance. And so we were just asking if you had any insight or thoughts on that as well, so that we could be guided going forward.
Well, I mean, with Community Preservation Act, I don't know of any regulation that says that any project that is submitted by an organization or whatever to the committee for consideration must be on capital improvement. I don't think there's anything in the CPC coalition, you know, in any, or the law that says it needs to be on a capital matrix.
Agreed.
And then I wonder, because most capital items on the matrix are funded through the general fund, because it's considered a one-time purchase. $25,000 and then a certain life expectancy. And a lot of times with that, there's advanced planning that goes into it. Sometimes with CPC projects, there's advanced planning as well, but I don't know if they would think of it as a capital. And then the question would be, if it's on the matrix, which is normally there's funds set aside in the general fund or possibly borrowing, bonding for it, would you be able to use CPC funds towards that? So that would also be a question.
Okay.
All right, whether, you know, funding would come into, you know, if it's on there and then general fund is set aside for that project, then can CPC funds come in and pay for that if you find out a project's eligible for CPC funds?
Right. Not everything on the matrix is CPC eligible.
Exactly, so it has to fit within
Certainly.
that criteria
Certainly.
of projects that would be eligible for CPC funds.
Right.
And a lot of times, we found on capital plans, it's most things looking forward, you know, like new vehicles or upgrades to town property that are not historic. You know, most capital items are not for recreation, well, apart from the field that people were talking about last week. But open space, recreation, historic documents, historic building renovations or restoration. A lot of that doesn't fall under a capital plan because most of it's going to be more than, I mean, most of it is because your preservation of historic things, and capital is like a one-time purchase to,
Sure.
you know, put new windows in this building or buy a fire truck or new police vehicles and things like that. So there's a lot of questions, and I have to apologize because I haven't had the chance to do the research that I would have wanted to do on it, to really look into it, because I'm alone in the office these days.
Oh, no, I don't think there's any reason to apologize. This
Yeah.
was really just gathering more information. It seems as though, I mean, we've been operating for a while as a committee, not using the matrix as a litmus test for whether to consider something. But we also know that if an application comes to us for something that might fall on a matrix and it's not there, it may just be good advice to the applicant that we would advise them that if it is something that is for a town department and it is a capital nature, but it's not on the matrix, it probably means that the town administrator, the board of selectmen, the capital improvement committee, and finance committee, or all of the above, aren't aware of it, and thus it may, these are important groups who should be aware of it.
Exactly.
So no need to apologize for that at all.
Yeah.
Lisa.
I mean, and there could be other funding available. There could be grant, possibly.
Mix and match.
There could be some other fundings available as well, depending on what the item is, or the project is.
Teresa and then Phil?
So what I don't understand is, why isn't everything that the town owns on this, and whether it's funded or not, why isn't, like, the Bonnie House that's currently owned by the town, or the fields that are owned by the town, why aren't those things on here? If there's zeros across because there's no money for them, that's one thing, but to have an inventory of properties that need upkeep and that need assistance, is there a separate matrix of that, or?
Not that I'm aware of. However, capital is not to be used for maintenance. It's a one-time purchase of something that's $25,000 or more and has a certain lifespan. So maintenance of fields or upkeep are not capital in nature.
But we have certain properties in town that need massive, infrastructure capital to
The Bonnie
get
House,
them.
the Bonnie House.
The Bonnie House is a prime
Yeah.
example that, basically we've been languishing because it is whose responsibility? The commission, the historical society, the historical commission, the CBC, who's supposed to be leading the charge? It is owned by the town and is just sitting there, and by volunteers, it's still standing. But it seems to me that a property like that needs an infusion of capital, whether it's funded or not, should at least be on the matrix so that people's eyes are on it and we remember that it's owned by the town and it's there. Or certain fields that are unusable.
Like the one at middle school.
Right. That needs capital to get it to a point where we can maintain it.
Right.
So those are just two isolated, I can think of probably like 5 others right off the top of my head that just aren't on here. I think that the departments get their say, but there are other things that fall outside of the department.
Well, it could be that nobody's approached the
Right.
capital improvement committee to ask them to put that particular piece of property or that open space recreation on capital. It could be that nobody's requested it be on capital,
Yeah.
which is very possible.
And maybe maybe there hasn't been a process where people know that they should do that. So, like, I'm the chair of the historical commission. It hadn't really occurred to me that I needed to go to the capital improvements to get the Bonnie House to put on here. Now that I did, I will. But, you know, but maybe having another revisit of it so that all the committees and commissions know.
I have a question. Could you tell us exactly where it starts? How do we know that these people, that's all they have? Do you send them letters or forms to fill out and give us what has to be done? And then that goes to CIC and then they meet with them? Or could you just tell us the process?
I'll try. I mean, I haven't been involved in the process, but I mean, normally, prior to town meeting, to annual town meeting, normally with the capital improvement, the matrix, we have the matrix in our office.
Right.
So it's looked at way prior, so when Todd and I start to sit down and look at the budget, the capital matrix is something we're gonna look at as well. And we'll revisit it. And we'll look at what's already on there. And then look and see what kind of funding we have with the budget that we have, what capital projects we could possibly fund.
But who
So-
gets to put the list on here? You send out
So,
forms to the,
Yeah, well, I don't know how Hanson does it yet, because I haven't been involved in the process. I
And
mean,
Lisa, if I may just interrupt,
Yep.
John, and forgive me for this, but I think I have a recollection. John, did your committee put out memos to departments about inviting items to be put on the
I
matrix?
think we did.
Okay.
oh, okay.
So it may be that there was some sort of communication from your committee out to various departments.
Okay, okay.
And that might just be a piece of it.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, how it got on here.
And
Because
so,
Parks and Fields has nothing, ever.
and that may, yes, then but they may speak to what Lisa's saying about the
Yes.
department, doing some of the outreach. I'm sorry, Lisa, if you want to complete your
Sorry.
thought.
no, so,
I'll go to Phil afterwards.
normally, once we start looking at the budget, we look at that matrix, and then the selectmen or the capital improvement would send a notice out to the department saying, hey, we're starting to put the budget together for annual town meeting. If you have capital items that you want to add that are not on the current
The
matrix,
current one, okay.
please submit it to either our office or capital improvement. I just have to find out how here in Hanson, that process works.
Sure,
And then it will get put on.
Okay.
thank
Okay.
you. Phil, I'm sorry, Dan, Phil had a question, then we'll go to you.
Just a few comments, because I think this is a very good set of discussions to be having. It seems to me like listing a project on the capital improvement program, or at least attempting to do so, puts that project on the map, on the radar, whatever you want to call it. Because if it doesn't get on there, or if it doesn't get discussed in a broad enough setting, as was just said, a lot of important pieces of town government might not be aware of it or have adequate time to evaluate it. Another thing is, I have a strong sense, having observed a lot of this from a distance, some departments are very uninvolved and maybe even less aware than they should be of the whole capital improvement process, despite the efforts of the committee to involve them. And so how that gets corrected is certainly, I think, on the table. And the points to consider that would come up as things go forward for any particular project or idea is, it seems to me it comes down to various people, voters, town meeting members, evaluating what's the best source for money for a worthwhile project. Ought it to be the general fund, or ought it to be CPC, where, by the way, I think there's a great risk of overwhelming a much more limited pool of funds with a large, very important and very excellent project, but if it's large, it will overwhelm the funds, let's say the I don't forget the term, there's special areas, but overwhelm the overall funds available, such that other worthy projects that are small, but would be harmed by the smallest, wouldn't happen. And all of this, of course, does elevate the visibility so that anyone who's aware of any grant for any of these things should be able to pursue it. But I think that we need to, as a committee here, be tracking how all of this is going, but also help people to realize we are not necessarily their only resource. And
Right.
that would be a good goal, I think. Something maybe could be mentioned in our forum coming up.
I think that's a fair point, Phil. Diane?
I just had a quick question. It doesn't, I'm not even sure it really relates to CPC. I don't think it does. But just looking at all the items for fiscal year '22 under the schools, and it says these are total cost estimates do not reflect the cost share per town based on enrollment. Is it still like that even though we don't go by the enrollment anymore?
Yeah, so as far as the assessment, they do not do it by enrollment anymore. They do it under the statutory. But as far as capital is concerned,
Yeah.
I have to check and see how capital is going to be assessed, because this was the first year under the new assessment.
Right, so I just wondered how.
Yeah,
that
so
reflects.
that we have to look in to see how, and I actually have a meeting with the school committee next Wednesday. And then, we need to talk to town council and see how
Right, how
capital
it's all
items are
split.
going to be, distributed between the two towns.
Yeah,
So
there's a ton of
that's
stuff here.
definitely something that we need to figure out. And also too, if I may,
Certainly.
Mr. Chair. So the Community Compact is a grant program for towns to do best practices types of grants. So unfortunately, Hanson really hasn't taken advantage of it. As far as I can see, they really haven't done anything with it since 2018. So there's a lot of years that they unfortunately have missed out. But this year I did get 2 grants to do a couple of a wage and classification study and a economic development manual. So those are two grants that are going to be used for those 2 projects. If we're able, because prior you could ask for it every year. I don't know if they're now restricting towns to every other year. But if we can apply for this for the next round, a formal capital plan is next on my list. We had the Collins Center do one for Whitman, and it was fantastic. And it actually answered a lot of the questions that Phil brought up as far as funding sources, grant sources. They identify, they take the capital, they categorize it based on importance and things like that. Then they identify possible funding sources for each capital, which it's a fantastic document. So that is on my radar for the next round as soon as we qualify for it. But I think that will help the town a lot, rather than having a piece of paper. They do pictures, they help with full inventories, and they actually help with costing out these things based on how much it would cost now, based on how, and then they project how much it might cost if we wait 5 years, how much it will cost 10 years, and so it's a really, really valuable document that provides a lot of education.
That's promising. Teresa?
That's great. I mean, that sounds like a wonderful process. Before that, if you do kind of figure out how the letters go out, I would just suggest that maybe the letters go out to the committees and commissions too, so that they can, just say, we're pulling together the capital plan. If you have input, to let you know. Because again, it's definitely divided by sort of department, but I think there's a lot of really good thoughts and energy and, people's concerns in the committees and commissions of town too.
Yeah, I mean, I would gather that they would go out to the commissions and committees and boards, but if they don't,
I don't think they do.
I can see,
Yeah, I
make
can
sure
think
that
so.
we change that process, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, this is my first go-round with how Hanson does its capital and budgeting process that Todd and I will be starting sometime this month, so.
Well,
Yeah.
this, up to this point, I think it's been very helpful.
Yeah.
And for members of the committee who do represent boards and commissions, it may be something to bring back to respective boards for, certainly for conversation. But, so this document it's pretty in-depth. I think we could all look at the document and as Lisa had pointed out, most of the items on the document, as it's currently written, would not fall within the realm. But as I'm thinking about it, as I'm listening, the conservation items, the historic items, the recreation items, at the parks and fields items, as they start to populate this document, and as Phil said, get on the radar, that I think speaks to some of the issues. We have a brief agenda item later talking about a potential application about replacing, as Lisa and I spoke about this, replacing the fence that separates the Botieri field from the highway department. And we've had good conversations, again, I think Phil mentioned it earlier, about who has skin in the game, which dosage of money should it come from. You have a potentially $50,000 fence replacement where a combination of the Little League, raise and appropriate, or general fund, CPC might be a formula where all parties have a role in this. I think some of you were kind of talking about that sentiment, but that's I think where we got to the idea of these items on the capital matrix brings it to everybody's attention. So I appreciate the efforts of both of you for coming tonight. But I'll entertain any other questions or comments before we move on. Patty?
You were talking about the Botieri Field fence. That's town-owned property. Can CPC do money for town property?
Yes.
Oh, okay,
yes.
because we
And
do that for the Bonnie House, but that's not really town-owned, that's a commission.
there are some recent amendments, and Lisa was helpful in pointing this out.
Oh, okay.
There are some recent amendments in 2012. And the fact that, I think there was a suggestion that perhaps the location of this fence made a difference.
Right.
And it appears as though it makes no difference. The only caveat being maintenance/repairs,
Right.
absolutely
Absolutely
not.
not, I know
If the
that.
town wanted to repair that fence, it would have to be funded elsewhere.
Yeah.
But to take down the entire fence and replace it would be fair game.
Oh,
And again,
okay.
as we've said, it may not be something that the committee would recommend 100% funding for this replacement. But in a recreational setting, that would be permissible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments on this? Okay, I'm happy to keep this on the agenda under old business if folks have any aha moments and want to continue to talk about this next month. But in the meantime, and Lisa, if you don't mind, if there's any information that you'd want to send to me that I could share with the committee in the next couple of months as you learn a little bit more about the process, I'd be happy to pass that along through Shirley to the members of the committee, so.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm happy to reach out and provide as much information as I go along
That's great,
and learn. And hopefully we'll have a new executive assistant starting December 13th.
fantastic.
Oh, super.
Yes, yes, that'll be, yes.
That'll be a lot.
Thank you for making a second trip back to Town Hall. John, thanks for coming tonight. Thanks for giving us your insight on how this matrix is formed. I appreciate it. We appreciate it. Thank you, Patty.
Oops, yes, thank you. Need that. Gosh, that's my lifeline.
Don't leave that behind.
Medication.
Thank you. So if,
Everybody have a great night, and thank you for everything that you do for the town, to volunteer. It's tough to come back out at 7:30 tonight, come to a meeting. It's
it's
tough.
dark at 4,
I
yeah.
know, it feels like it's midnight at this point.
Well, you get to study the planets and stars out
That's
there.
it.
Yeah,
All the
the light
perks.
it's clear, so it's a pretty sky out there.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks,
All
Lisa.
right,
Good night.
everybody, good to see you all.
Meeting.
Thank you.
I know.
Thanks, Patty. We'll see you.
Pajamas right now.
So we still have a quorum, so we'll try to move through the remaining parts of this agenda. Under my update, there were no, with the exception of Todd taking the remaining money of the housing production plan off of the grid, there were no, at long last, no other updates in terms of financials, and Shirley's done a nice job of just checking on a monthly basis. We'll do the same for our next meeting. If I could take a motion to approve the minutes from the October 13th meeting.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Teresa.
Second.
Second by Phil. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? No opposition
Abstain.
and one abstention. So a vote of 4-0-1 to approve the minutes. Thank you. Under old business, North End Cabins,
I
Diane?
have a question
Yes.
on that. It's been a while, and I just would like you to know that I resigned my post as chairperson of the Recreation Commission, and I'm vacating my seat entirely as of December 1.
From Recreation.
So, don't look at me like that. And I wanted to know if the grant, and I haven't read it, so we want to have some of the caretakers do the work, and we didn't know, can we pay them out of that grant if they are town employees, rather than having a third-party contractor come in, because there are some things that need to be done that some of our newer caretakers can do.
I'll try to answer that. I feel like in the last few years, this question has come up. It's worth double checking what I'm thinking. If the caretakers are town employees and the funds for their salary have already been allocated, I think the idea is we're supplanting money that's already been budgeted. So I'm thinking the answer is no. But the
What if
rationale.
it's on top of it?
I wonder, that's what I'm thinking, I'm wondering if there's a distinction that, so you've got somebody and there's a funding source for their hours that they're
Right.
working.
For regular hours.
Right.
Because we've cut back significantly just because we are
Right.
not at all subsidized right now. And
I would be happy to run that question through Lisa to see if we could get an answer. I understand for economical reasons so if the idea is.
we've cut everybody's hours, right?
Right, but Teresa, you may have a point that there's a distinction where if it's above and beyond someone's regular work hours, is that any different than getting a third-party contractor to do it? So,
That
We're-
was my question.
yeah, I can certainly ask that question.
I think the details of what the grant program, the particular grant program say, might be quite informative about that. I know the grants I've had, it's been very clear how to, whether it's for the grant funds or matching funds, exactly how it's all supposed to work. And usually the grant agency would be pretty full of guidance on that, so yeah, to be checked.
Yeah, I'll take a closer look, be happy to.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Teresa?
Diane?
Sure.
Is there a person on your recreation committee who would be willing to sit on the CPC?
I don't know. I wasn't planning on vacating here.
Do you represent the recreation? Is that a spot? Is that a designated?
I think, Diane, you're
I'm at large.
You're an at-large, so
Oh,
it's
you're at large,
it's
okay.
coincidental. So recreation does not, excuse me, the rec commission, I don't think,
Has
it's
a-
parks and fields versus recreation. So-
Got it.
Yeah.
But your involvement with recreation has been a happy coincidence of you
Indeed.
being able to address things that overlap.
Should have been a coincidence.
Then you'll stay on this.
Very happy.
I'm sorry?
You're staying on this committee?
Yes, I
Got
am.
it.
Very good. Thank you. We'll, when we have Alan back, we can follow up on Bonnie House. Teresa, and I know you were unable to meet tonight, so we'll also come back to Bonnie House.
Well, just so you know that, I had a conversation with Josh about putting in a letter for funding for the Bonnie House, and so I know that we could maybe collaborate on that letter to get it in.
Excellent.
Letter funding from what sort?
Well, there's various funding sources swirling around, and just to have a letter standby in the event that certain funding is made available.
I know special work done in Hanson on a particular environmental thing. There was an earmark on the annual state budget, the appropriate part of the state budget, that worked splendidly on behalf of the town for that. So, ooh, interesting.
Yeah, I think with this additional funding at the state level, elected officials may be able to provide some direct support for specific local projects.
And I just want to have the letter on hand.
Understood.
So that's why I was calling, if you could, maybe we could circle back up.
Absolutely. Thank you. Phil Thomasville?
I observed our contract surveyor in the process of completing the final bound setting and surveying work. So I expect that with that final step being completed, I think within the next couple of weeks, we'd have the report and have the invoice and everything else. We'd be getting ready to close that out. With those things in hand, I'll be reaching out to the Wildlands Trust, who holds the CR on it and who would be using those newly documented sets of information to do their annual inspections. My hope is that at the most, after one more of our meetings, this can fall off the agenda.
Wonderful.
After a decade.
We're pacing ourselves, well done, thank you. Next item is Boterry Field Town Forest. This remains on here, it's still an open item. I did have a conversation with Lisa since between our last meeting and now to just raise the matter that it's, the way that the warrant article was written, it was written with a couple of thoughts in mind. This committee has commented about the upper parking lot, and Eric Olson, who was the Parks and Fields representative up until a little earlier this month, that's now a vacancy on our committee as well. What I wanted to let Lisa know is that both from a conservation, and I don't want to speak for you, Phil, but from a conservation upper parking lot, town forest entrance point of view, and from the, I guess, I think the way Eric described it is the growth between the upper parking lot and the first field, it gets overgrown. And so if you read the original article language and the explanation from when this was passed back in 2013, something like that, both projects, both ideas appear to fall in bounds. And what I did in reaching out to Lisa was to say, I may want to encourage the parties, whether that's Parks and Fields Commission, to steer questions about this to you, because there may be a benefit to having one procurement for, say, one company to come in and address the curb appeal of the entrance to the town forest, or issues raised in the way that the upper parking lot is not being utilized, but it's not maximizing its potential.
It's not being optimized.
It's
Right,
not
it's
being
not-
optimized, as well as at the time, what Eric was saying is that there's more that could be done to fulfill the spirit of that article. So I just want to point out, and normally I wouldn't have anything really intelligent to say about this particular item, but I at least wanted to let Lisa know from a procurement point of view that there may be two committees, and Parks and Fields is in a bit of transition right now, but that there may be two groups both looking to make value-added changes to the Boterry area and the entrance of the town forest, and we have permissible funds. So I would have probably thought, and others, that a few months ago, that once that sign was put in, we were ready to wrap this up.
Yeah.
But with a couple of other ideas, and when I look back at the article, I said, wow, these are actually within the bounds of how that article was written, and it might be worth exploring that. Whereas if it was out of bounds, we would say sweep the money, go back to a town meeting and get it reapproved. So it's something that we're not, I don't think I was taking immediate action on, but I wanted to put it as Lisa being the procurement officer, to just let her know that there may be some additional activity there.
I think so.
Phil?
Just to react to that, it was the perception of conservation that the town forest piece was done, was completed. The signs are up, the trail was improved, etc. However, shedding new light here is the idea of further improvements cosmetically and improving the user experience of people who show up in that area for enjoyment of the town forest, and clearly also for the ball field activities. The economics of scale makes sense, and I hadn't thought about it until this very moment, but perhaps conservation could withdraw its verbal or its perceived notion that our part is done and cooperate with all parties, which we've been doing from the beginning. We've done a lot of cooperation. So let that cooperation continue. I've heard that.
And what I'd be happy to do, just because I mentioned it, is once we know that the Parks and Fields Committee is reestablished, that I might reach out to, and to help, I suppose, just to maybe put Lisa in touch with the Parks and Fields rep and yourself, maybe with one joint conversation, what scope of work would you want? Here's the remaining budget we have for that article. Let's all confirm that it's within bounds, and maybe that could be a springtime expenditure.
That makes sense, and depending on how long it takes for winter to start, might not wait till spring.
We're
Great.
okay with that then.
Yes. Back to you, Phil, for PCH Park Engineering Plan.
No new information tonight. Our meeting that was scheduled for late October had to be postponed, so we did not get any updates on really any aspects of that. I will say, I'll just confirm once again though, that the committee, despite its, I'll blame COVID for most of it, despite its limited activity the last year and a half or so, is still enthused about and wants to make sure the whole town stays motivated to get the engineering plan done, because that's going to be the framework for a lot of other really nice things.
Absolutely.
Motivation's there, but no new details.
Thank you.
And just a quick
Teresa?
update on that is that I have conscripted another person to try and go out and measure the schoolhouse and the other 2 buildings, and so he said he was gonna go this week. So I'm still getting you those measurements so that you can keep those in mind and put them on whatever plan is appropriate.
And let's be specific, because that's such an important accomplishment to get to do. I would like to be able to tell the rest of the hospital committee that as of Monday, we've got measurements for those buildings.
This coming Monday.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Okay.
It's,
I'll call him again.
I just
I'm gonna have to go out there myself, because I know it, but I'm still plugging away trying to get other people to do it.
that would be great.
Thank you.
I'll help you.
Sleeper preserve, Phil?
Go ahead and do it.
The legal work is ongoing, have not yet received final clearance of all of the probate and title activity. The optimism is still extremely high. We are eager for that to be completed so that we can then commence, we can complete the survey work, which we had started earlier, and also any other steps required, because we want the sleeper preserve to be all buttoned up and complete well before the state grant deadline of June 30th next year.
Okay, thank you. A trail grant match for PCH trail grant match.
Lisa and I accomplished a very good thing. As we had mentioned last time, due for many reasons, the town had not, way back late last year, had not actually executed its contract with the state for accepting the grant. That, of course, has been done. What we did do lately is we were able to schedule and have about a 30-minute teleconference with the agency, DCR, which went over the contract and all of the details. There's about half a dozen forms that apply to different stages of the work and what it all meant to the town and its responsibilities. That went very well, and so I think we're fully prepared to do actual visible work pretty soon.
That's great. Thank you. And Teresa, historical markers.
So finally, some new life has breathed into the marker. So I met with the highway director, then the storm hit. So we talked again on the phone. We're gonna go out in another couple of weeks to do, he's on board to dig all the holes into the dig state. So that's good. That's my 3rd highway director that I've worked through. And then the guy who does the backing and the metal poles said he would do it and hold the estimate. I finally heard back from the guy who actually does the markers. He had been on an extended trip in Europe, and that's why he didn't get back to me this summer. But he is still interested in doing it. I resent him back the estimate. He has to revisit to make sure he can hold those numbers. So the thing I wanted to ask here was if, I put in an application based on the estimates that they had given us. If there is an increase, what would be the process to come back to increase? Again, I wouldn't imagine it would be a lot. It would probably be in the hundreds, less than if he increased it, but hopefully we'll hold it.
Right.
But if it did change, is there a process to come back?
Again, my gut reaction would be it would probably be and obviously an amended application and an additional vote of the committee to put something in front of town meeting. And if that wasn't, depending on what the amount is, and you'd probably come to the same conclusion, would be maybe asking the Historical Society if there was, if they'd be willing to,
Is there flexibility with administrative costs or something like that? To
Oh,
be able to
yeah.
up, if it was, you know, a smaller amount, so that we wouldn't have to go back to town meeting?
I could ask that question.
As long as that wouldn't be a Pandora's box, we'd open for projects that have unintended shortfalls.
Yeah, I guess it's about getting a better definition of administrative expenses to know if that's kind of a safety net for cost overruns.
Yeah.
I can look into that. Okay.
I might just take up a collection, I need to get this
Yeah.
done.
Yes.
And then my committee, which, so I have Karen is on my committee for the text and Patricia North, and then Kurt Tarvis, who just joined the Historical Commission, has to be on it as well. And then the library is for Julie and me. So I was thinking, now that I have folks back on board, we could get together and kind of start
That's
searching out
wonderful.
with that. Excellent.
Thank you for that. It's
But
Not-
yeah,
not
I
for
was a
lack
little
of
nervous
trying.
when he said he had to go back and revisit the estimate, and so I haven't heard back from him yet, but
pass the hat if it's,
yeah.
get this done. And our most recent project added to the list is the Little Cedar Swamp, but I realize it hasn't been that long, it has been on the list.
Well, it's a pleasure to say that right now the person's sales agreement is in process. We gave all the details to town council. We've been in contact with the still motivated seller. We want to have the P&S in place before the seller starts to lose motivation. But it's going ahead, and
Can you remind me where Little Cedar Swamp is?
Yeah.
this is, if you drive north on Winter Street,
Yeah.
you go over the hill and then down the hill past the entrance to Stonebridge, and then you come to a section where there's no houses at all on the left for about at least a quarter of a mile. That is the eastern edge of the Little Cedar Swamp. It's been on the maps as such for a long time. It's not very visible because there's nothing there except the swamp, but it's providing a lot of open space and flood control services. And what has happened over the decades is gradually, piece here, piece there, have come under town ownership. The western edge came under control of the town when they bought the land for the middle school, which took about 30 years to build, but they did that. We have other pieces there which are conservation land already. There's a few pieces that are privately owned, including the acreage that's behind the Eversource gas pressure project on Whitman Street. But this is a 9-acre piece that is on the left as you go north on Winter Street, right where the brook which drains the swamp goes under Winter Street, and which, by the way, is going to be the subject of culvert upgrade in the very, very near future.
Is that where there's flooding a lot?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, flooding is from the swamp. The swamp prevents the flooding from being any worse than it is.
Mhm.
And all that works together. And this will greatly help to really consolidate and sort of unify the ownership and management of the swamp. It's one of our greatest stormwater control assets in town, and it'll be helpful in other ways too. Plus, if you take the time to go in there with your briar chaps on and this and that, it's a pretty cool place. You think you're somewhere else on the planet. But
Are
we're
there
looking forward
paths
to it.
that are accessible to it?
No, but if one is a bushwhacker, one can get across it, depending on the height of your boots and your energy.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for that update. We did address under 4B the Botteri fence update, but I will add one other item. I was in email communication with Adam
Interior? Is it?
Vallow.
Did she say?
Valchuk, about,
Not Adam Vinatieri.
I was like,
Forgive me. Valachovic?
Valchuk,
Yeah.
right?
Valkovic.
Valavic.
Valkovic.
Valkovic, okay.
Yes, my apologies.
He's closely related.
Adam is taking the lead through Hanson Little League
Yeah.
regarding the fence. I, with some help from Shirley, have directed him to where the Part B of the application is. he had also done some research, looking into the matter, also in communication with Lisa. So I share with you that Adam will continue working on Part B, and it will be a subsequent conversation. When I look ahead to us going into the winter and into closer to springtime meeting, this fence application is probably at the moment the only new application item that's still in the works. The next item under old business was a continuation of a conversation we had last month involving, oh no, forgive me, I have my glasses on. That's under new business. We were, public forum discussion, which is under old business. What I had suggested at the last meeting was that members of this committee who represent other boards and commissions would somehow through the months of October and November go back to their respective boards and commissions and ask the question, what does your body think might be future projects that would be CPA eligible as an alternate way of building and generating refreshed ideas on what our community preservation plan. I think our theme is that we're looking to pull together pieces of a puzzle and not just be dealing with one-off applications. We want to see the whole as well as the parts. So for our public forum for next month, what I would presume to do is have a limited agenda, but that the focus of the agenda would be to hear from members of our committee who are representing a board. And the beauty of this is that it doesn't just have to be this one magical meeting, but it's something that we'll be able to, we'll seek members of the public to attend. And Shirley, as I'm saying this out loud, I wonder if you might be able to, would you mind communicating with Lisa? Perhaps we could ask the Board of Selectmen to at least announce this. They do some good announcing at the starts of their meetings, of upcoming board meetings and whatnot. But maybe just putting in a plug that there is that there is a public forum to talk about priorities for community preservation. And maybe Shirley, you and I could talk about a 30-word blurb to maybe go into the Hanson Express as well as just another media form of sharing that information. So it may feel like it's just a conversation, it may be a conversation amongst ourselves, but at the very least we can have our own committee members who are not at-large members weigh in and express what the folks at the various committees are thinking. So that's the mindset. The plan right now is to still just have that be the focal point of our agenda for our December meeting. And does anyone feel differently, or is the dosage wrong, or should we reconsider that?
I like the idea, but I have a question.
Sure.
Any chance that we could have access to a projector, so if we had, let's say, like a PowerPoint prepared, or the other people, if any one of us or all of us had content that would facilitate our making our little presentation, put it up visually as well as verbally, because I think that makes a big difference in how you get people's attention and have them remember your point and maybe even agree with it. You know, it's a great tool. I think we've way underutilized it in more than one board and committee around town. But I wonder, I do not possess a laptop with those kinds of capabilities or with a projector. Can this committee get that access?
I think it can, I'm not sure, but I think
Well,
it can.
again, the technology, wherever it is, can we access it for a forum?
I will ask for that. Yes, I'll ask to see what our
Because we
options
could
are.
probably put things on a thumb drive or multiple of them. I just don't know how to make it happen.
No, I think that's a good idea, Phil, and I'll look into that, absolutely.
Tom, could I ask another question?
Teresa?
Is the idea to get it in this year, or, I'm just wondering if December is the right month to do it, or?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a fair point. With the gap, with the COVID gap, at this moment, there's nothing pressing us to have this in December. It could be, and if folks representing other boards said, you know, actually it would be better if if I had another month to just talk to my own boards, we could kick this to January. It's not going to have any impact on what, if anything, we bring to a spring '22 town meeting with recommendations. The spirit, I think, is that a lot of the conversations we have are about town plans and the coordination of plans. And I think we should, as a committee, go on record with what we think the priorities are. If it takes us an extra month to do that, I think that's fine, quite honestly. So if the consensus is, why don't we kick it until after the new year, I don't think it's gonna do any harm or hold us back at all. It's really giving, because if the boards that constitute most of this committee don't have the time to have those richer conversations, then it's just an ornamental conversation at our level, so.
It needs to be optimal.
Yeah, so with that said, Shirley, if people okay with that, if we.
I think that makes good sense, especially since starting tomorrow, there's like 3 business days in the short weeks between now and
Right.
then that aren't gonna happen.
Yeah,
And,
no, that's,
And the housing authority is in the middle of an executive director search, and that is taking up all of our time, so there's not gonna be any thinking at our next 2 meetings, beyond that. So it would be nice to be able to have a meeting with them,
I think March is a great month.
and then do it in January or February, but.
Q1 of next year.
okay. Well, I think then Shirley, we'll make an adjustment, we'll hold off on those ideas for now. Okay.
I like the idea of doing it,
Yeah,
but
we-
I think
but
it would
the
be,
committees
I would
need
be
to
do it well.
here, yeah.
The committees need the time to do it, to bring something back, and it may motivate us to also find other ways to reach out to other parties to make sure that, especially, and then let's use Parks and Fields as an example, there's a committee that
Is reforming,
is reforming, they wouldn't have a robust response,
right.
so that's a fair point. Okay, great, thank you. Under new business, we took 5A out of order, and in the interest of time, and because we just so that while we still have a quorum, 5B is on here, and Shirley, I'll just ask that we move this to our next agenda. Discussion of the application submission protocol was just a follow-up. I thought it would be better to have it as an agenda item to talk about how the committee feels about receiving applications, giving feedback to applicants, and then having opportunities to vote. We started to talk about that last month with some suggestions about not wanting to overburden the applicant to come multiple times to make a presentation, it's a public meeting, anyone can sit in those chairs and listen, but if an applicant sent the committee an application, that the first time the committee deliberates over it might be to simply talk out loud as a committee about it, pull together some feedback, and then maybe the applicant presents at a subsequent meeting. So perhaps with a larger contingent of the committee here, it'd be better to wait and talk about that further another time. When someone applies with Part A, how we give feedback, how do we handle it with Part B? I think there was some good questions being asked about how can we do something that's efficient and just mindful of everybody's time. Phil?
If I may say, as a multiple-time applicant, I felt that the improvements that were made a few years ago when you and John sat down that were excellent improvements. Before that, I thought it was kind of a daunting process, a little bit confusing. I think that there are some good things about our process now. I think it's very important to have the Part A, by which we would decide its eligibility to begin with, is as critical as ever. I think is always going to be the starting point of any idea like this. And further, I think that having an applicant appear multiple times before us is no great burden considering what they're asking for. I mean, you're asking usually for tens of thousands of dollars, and I think we should be, as applicants, I've always been willing to show up and speak for my stuff, but people need to grasp that there's a lot of competition for dollars, and the people who compete the best and the most communication and information typically will have a better chance. And it isn't like we want to create extra work, but I think a lot of the work was done a few years ago. Maybe there are improvements to do further, and that's fine. But
yeah, and I think, and thank you, Phil, I think that the documents, we've done a nice job collectively on that, and if the process simply is, we'll take them as they come, we'll review them. Sometimes the conversations might be amongst ourselves, and other times it might be direct questions to the applicant. So, but that's something that surely we can just put on another agenda, and I appreciate your feedback on that. With regard, just to end with some housekeeping, our next scheduled meeting would be Wednesday, December 8th. While I don't want to stop any momentum, I also want to be mindful. Does anyone who's currently here today feel that date is complicated? Does the world between Thanksgiving and the December recess, the end of the year, I would expect that our agenda would be similar to this. I would presume to move forward, and if members have a challenge and we can't get a quorum, then I would take that as a sign that it might not have been the best date, but I didn't
Speaking
know.
for a member who's not here, our historical member, Alan Clemens, is right now only day 2 post-receiving is one of a new need. And I don't know that he'd be very mobile in in December. He might be much more mobile in January. So just speaking to that
He's
particular
well.
point,
Yes.
we hope so too.
I mean, I would say that if we don't have an application or there's nothing pertinent that we could even skip December, I'll even go.
New.
No, yeah.
Yeah, I
Correct.
think that's what we did last year as well.
Is it any objection that if we get to the end of November and there's no application or new content submitted, you'd be okay if we
Yes.
reconvene?
Agreed.
Okay. All right. So Shirley, you and I will be in communication on that as to whether or not we would
And you
schedule.
just let us know if January is the meeting that we're gonna be doing the
forum.
report back,
Yeah,
or if it's
January.
February, just so that we are prepared for that.
Thank you. And with 30 seconds to spare, thank you for your patience, Diane. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by, second, Teresa, Diane, no discussion, all in favor?
Yay.
Unanimous. 8:30, we are adjourned.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Diane, appreciate it. I'll get the camera.